Prologue. A blast of cold wind battered Caitlin's midnight black hair as she trudged across the catastrophically torn earth. The evening was swiftly approaching like the day Earth changed in shape. The wreckage of a large city loomed overhead, a symbol of strength and prosperity, though badly severed from the reality she once knew. The Earth had experienced the worst of all things naturally chaotic and deathly. Caitlin saw the worst damage she had seen from cities across the continent here. Caitlin's antics were in a survive and strive state. Passing still, worn, and shredded cars, she searched rapidly for anything that would make her life easier along the way. As she pulled back an SUV door, a young girl gasped in surprise. Caitlin guessed the girl's age to be approximately 11 years old. She shuddered and quickly questioned, "Are there any more survivors here?" The child nodded. An asteroid the size of Rhode Island violently struck the Northern American continent somewhere near the Great Lakes on the evening of July 4th of 2022. On that fateful day, Caitlin had opted to visit a friend in California who was having a party for the holiday. The sun was setting. 2 states from her normal residence in Texas, and as a vacationing college student, she watched the landscape whiz by. "One more state to go," she said to herself as they pulled away from a station in heat-radiating Arizona. So she pressed a window down and open. She had less than 1 hour to wait to be at her destination and whisked to a party she had anticipated most of the spring semester. First, the sky lit up like an atom bomb had struck, yet not a cloud in sight would be challenged for the ruby-red color that followed. Within moments, a wave of earth shifting traveled through the continent, disabling most of the electronics and moving everything as if an earthquake had suddenly jolted the crust several feet from normality. Screams from almost everyone within the outer vicinity of the damage were heard throughout miles of distance from the impact. The asteroid affected everyone the same. Then another came moments after the first, another, and when the rocks stopped falling, Earth had almost been annihilated. As her hand came through a layer of dirt and debris, Caitlin coughed the bitter decay from her lungs. Her eyes darted around, only to find herself displaced. The train she had been in was flung like a model across the landscape and laid on a distant horizon. Everyone she had been in casual discussion with just moments before taking a moment for herself had vanished. Lifeless and wounded bodies were now littered as far as her eye could see. She expected to see something familiar to train tracks, but nothing but cement, dirt, and pieces of wood were about her. She pulled herself to her feet, wind dirt falling away. There was a sharp ping rung through her head like she had been hit bluntly at her crown. She had suffered a few bruises, but nothing was present to indicate she had been hit by anything. All things considered, maybe she just fell from the flung train's window onto her head. She wondered how she got to the location she had woke. Getting to the party had left her mind uneasy and disregarding. Much more to worry about festered in her consciousness, and for a moment she could think nothing but pleading for anyone's presence. Here in this vast reshaped land was nothing familiar. She looked upon her summer dress to find many shredded pieces of cloth throughout. As she called for help, nothing surrounded her to suggest anyone else was alive. No help would come for Caitlin, for her surroundings had been obliterated of life. She wandered perilously from city to city, inching her way to what we used to call Los Angeles. She had found clothing she stripped from now naked bodies. She found shelter in nooks and crannies of a past and destroyed civilization. Long nights of raging storms came and went, as if earth thirsted for the clamor of thunder, and the burning remains of trees lightning brought. No rain came. A drought had spread across the land, and the land was sapped of moisture. At times, hunger left her parched of sanity, and she hunted like a ravenous beast, stalking and preying on anything that moved. She came to favor the roasted flavor of her catch, which was often rodent. Caitlin had become a survivor, and in her glory, she was alone. As she wondered, she thought about family, friends, her boyfriend. Surely they were all still alive in Texas. She did not move toward Texas, but toward her destination, like the party would somehow still be happening and waiting her untimely arrival. Perhaps she was traumatized. She longed to feel the security of an embrace and the consideration of her lover. In moments of rest, she was sure that someday she would find survivors on this barren waste of space and perhaps get to live a fulfilling life with him. As the sun rose, Caitlin woke. 10 years had passed since the falling asteroid took her livelihood. Lying atop a worn sleeping bag, Caitlin pulls a 60-liter backpack up to her chest and dives one hand inside, pulling free a satchel of nuts. Quickly popping a few nuts in her mouth, she gazes out over the horizon to again lays eyes upon Los Angeles. The same old place I've become so fond, Caitlin whimpers. She had been from Texas to Los Angeles 4 times during the decade. Not a single soul was found alive. Caitlin had become a hardened and seasoned veteran of living in wilderness. The tears that once flowed so easily from her gradually stopped, and she knew that no search party would come for her, nor would she be a savior. She had compromised to always be a solo search party. From city to city, her searches landed the same result. Time after time, she hoped to find someone only to be left frustrated and discouraged. She knew the result would always lend this weakness, and she beckoned difference. Coming to the boundary of Los Angeles was easy. Buildings and decayed remains started and did not end until exiting the city. An old Union-type bank stood as a beacon of promise. Money had long been a thing she had striven to obtain. She came into the city at about noon. She loved the city because there was so much there to be found. Skipping across Tinseltown, she had an objective in mind. Today she would find a tent, though so many other stops were to be had. Homeless had made encampments in the days prior to the devastation, and then the cities inside a city, she'd find necessity that made life easier lived. As Caitlin began rummaging through the piles of debris and skeletal remains in the old homeless encampment and quickly yanked out a tent she stuffed into her backpack, she abruptly came to a stop. Still, she turned her head to one side, assuring herself she had heard something in the direction she stared. Nothing moved. Perhaps all the world had been lost to this major event, and she'd never find anyone alive, let alone the idea a man would come into her life. Sitting on the ground, she gazed her reflection on a broken skyscraper window. The storm was moving in, and the sun had descended more than she had expected, for adventure and searching had taken a considerable amount of time. A gust of wind broke her concentration. Now would be a great time to find shelter, but where? She began moving along a roadway toward the other side of the city and away from the storm. As she came to a stop near an SUV, she touched the SUV and noticed that the SUV seemed to be barely touched, as contrasted to other scratches and beaten cars she had come across along the way. Pulling back a door, she gasped and laid eyes upon a girl. The girl shifted from sleep to see Caitlin choking. "Are there any more survivors here?" The girl nods in apologetic agreement. "Yes, sorry, I just needed to get away from them for a little while. I had fallen asleep, must have fallen asleep while I was crying," the child offered. "What's your name?" Caitlin questioned. "Marie, you?" "I'm Caitlin. Come on, I'll show you where they are." Caitlin's eyes filled with tears as the girl walked toward a fallen building, close to that which she had yearned for. She tugged with the thoughts of finding the search relinquishing its grip on her. She knew there were people alive, and for this moment, she realized it would be for the better. "My dad was nagging at me to find something to make fire with. I think it's more of a man's job to find firewood, but he insisted that a life here would change our way of life, and I need to consider living without him. I don't know why he would say that," Marie shares. "And your mother?" Caitlin questions. "My mother died in the strike of the asteroids." Caitlin's grim expression outweighs. "I'm sorry to hear that. I was only a baby then, so I don't remember her. My father had raised me." Coming to a large, fallen skyscraper, Marie pointed toward the building. "They're over there, just a little further." A man with full red beard, muscly and fit, came into view. Caitlin took notice of his frustrated expression with a sort of fondness that reminded her of all nights passing. She pressed concern for the companionship of people. She wondered for a moment whether this would be a kind of interaction she wanted, or if she should fear them. Were there many more? "Is he your father?" Caitlin asked. "Yes, from the look of his face, I'm about to get reamed." The man quickly interjects. "Marie, where have you been? Who have you brought here?" Marie whispers to Caitlin, "I told you." Marie's father came close. I was so worried about you. Please don't run off like that again, Marie. We have a lot to do before storms arrive. Marie passed toward him and the shelter of a fallen building. Yes, father. Man turned to Caitlin with a relieved smile. Hello, I'm Kyler, Marie's father. We had found the shelter yesterday. I had no idea there were other survivors here. Would you like to walk with me to get wood? Caitlin's composure solidified, for she had never felt an attraction so strong to anyone as she did this man. There were not others. His size towered over her, and for a moment an overwhelming sense of safeness overcame her. Perhaps it was just her glee at such a meeting, or maybe it would be something more. She considered this man trustworthy and yearned to know more. Yes, Caitlin agreed. Kyler offers Caitlin a bottle of water as they make their way into the rubble of the city. My daughter was supposed to gather wood this morning, bright and early, but an argument of epic childhood proportions sent her crying and fleeing. She's a good kid, don't get me wrong. Without her mother, I've struggled to keep her attention, and she becomes so emotional that I cannot rely on these important lessons. She told me she lost her mother at the start of all this. I don't really know what I can offer you in way of assisting. I'd been out here for about a decade by myself. I know little about this world, mostly knowledgeable from Texas to California. I've been as far as the beach to know I'm here. I can't tell you how glad I am to be in your company. Kyler interrupts. So what's your story? How did you come to this place? Have you found anyone else in your travels? You're the first. Caitlin hesitates. I'm guessing the asteroids killed majority of the population of this god-awful planet. Caitlin cringes. Hey, I didn't mean to say it that way. It's just that it's truthful, he quickly responds. Picking up pieces of wood from the rubble, his hand eased the stack from her arms. At the contact of his hand, Caitlin shudders with an electric that seemed to pulse through her. I'll carry these. My daughter brought an excellent point to my attention. She had me consider that she is female today. I guess my manners were on the outs, and she was getting pretty tired of my antics. She is my little lady, and I should be more considerate. We better get back, he demands, pointing toward a large storm front approaching. Caitlin's demeanor had shifted from hard and rough to a more subtly feminine role. She knew that he would be her friend, companion, and lover. However, the notion seemed silly. She wanted not for anything less, and flirted with the idea that someday they would find a comfortable place to settle. Maria had been cleaning a space in the innermost area of the fallen building as Kyler and Caitlin entered. The building seemed sturdy, so Caitlin settled into the space with ease. Caitlin offers, Marie, would you like some help? Marie rejects. No, this is my chore. Daddy always has little things for me to do, so I don't get bored and I stay active. Right, Dad? It's a poor man's way out of the world to forget responsibility. Kyler nods. I found the wood for tonight's warmth. Let's make Caitlin feel welcome. There's no need. I'm comfortable. Caitlin takes some of the firewood and begins arranging the planks in a concentric circle. Kyler, making himself busy about the other side of the room, could not help notice Caitlin's beauty. There had been a moment she became vulnerable to his touch, and he had taken note. The wasteland had not made her the dark, sinister type of woman. She reminded him of his wife. Her hair, her skin, her simple movements. How long ago she had gone. He saw her as an equal, someone who made friends with his daughter almost immediately. He knew not when to make his move, but he felt it much too soon. Marie and Caitlin had come to a rest at some point after Kyler had lit the fire for a long and stormy night. As they had surrounded the fire, Marie laid herself upon Caitlin's sleeping bag and fell fast asleep. Kyler and Caitlin were sharing flirtatious gestures when a crack of thunder interrupted them. Wow, that was a big one. They seemed to be getting stronger. I don't know if it's atmospheric pressure or plain old tension of changing climates, Kyler says. The worst storm I had seen was outside of Amarillo. The thunder rolled for 2 days, while the gusts tore to shreds the small cities surrounding me. Luckily, during the Cold War, people across the states put in basements. I took my leave of all this and slept it off, Caitlin boasts. Kyler grins with a chuckle in his guttural enjoyment. He was happy to be talking to someone near his own age and getting a bit of a reprieve from full-time fathering. This night, her skin gleamed with heat, and he imagined her fleshed against his. He had been lonely for far too long, and in his state of heated debate, he reached out to her, placing his hand on hers. He felt protective of her. They had spent a considerable time wandering the wilderness in Northern California when Kyler kissed her for the first time. Kyler had wrapped her in furs and old lace he had found or hunted in his travels. They shared many nights of silence and sexual heat. They craved each other. Like animals in heat, they scurried about the landscape, never to be interrupted in their affair, yet respectful of the teen they had nurtured into a fine adult. In this love came love itself. They loved each other, and in doing so brought Caitlin a child. Caitlin had found her unlikely companion, and he his lover in a fate that would have killed most people. But somehow, in this unlikely meeting, they elevated each other to another world. A world that in time would flourish.